So we've been looking in class at various teachings, everything that Jesus does in his earthly life. Now we begin to transition our focus, to turn it away from the kind of ordinariness, as it were, of Jesus' life to the end of his life, to where it is that all of this ends up, and to, in a certain way, the more important things to know and to understand about Jesus and his ultimate impact in establishment of Christianity in general. So, looking at this, we begin with an event that happens quite a bit before the events of those last moments, those last hours of Jesus' life. An event that comes to be known as the Transfiguration. Write that out here. It is known as Transfiguration, as that is the translation of the Greek word that is used in this part, metamorphosis. So, metamorphosis is Greek, and transfiguration is Latin. Because of what happens in this event, because of what happens to Jesus and what is seen by Jesus in the midst of this. So you can see here on the screen, you can see the some of the art done. This particular one, I believe, from the late 16th or 17th century, of the event known as the Transfiguration. What it all entails, we'll see as we dive into the texts themselves. You should see on the left the particular texts that we are looking at: Matthew 17, 1 through 9, Mark chapter 9, verses 2 to 9, and Luke chapter 9, verses 28 to 36. So what we'll do is look through each individual, the accounts taken together, and see what is happening, and then break down and understand why this event is so pivotal, so important. Catholics who have been attending Mass or viewing Mass will have heard this gospel the previous Sunday, which is the second Sunday of Lent in the Catholic worship calendar. But why is it that it's so important to see that? So each of these events, each of these recollections say that this happens after a period of time. Matthew and Mark say 6 days, Luke says 8. The argument is that Luke counts in a different way than maybe Matthew and Mark, that Luke counts the day the previous events happen, and the day of it happening. So you can say more of the 8th day rather than 8 days. But this transfiguration happens after Jesus' closest disciples are being asked about what will happen, and he begins to foretell what will happen. He begins to say that he will suffer, he will be crucified, and will die, but also prophesying his resurrection. So diving into this, Jesus does not take all of his closest disciples, of his apostles. He takes 3 of them: Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. He takes them up to a high, so he takes them kind of separated from everybody else. Everybody else kind of stays at the foot of the hill, and he takes them up by themselves. Peter, James, and John are usually seen as kind of the inner circle of Jesus's apostles, as it were, his closest companions, his closest workers. Perhaps you could say even his most trusted of all of them, especially in light of what Jesus does with Peter, as we've talked about in previous classes, the dignity of chiefdom of the apostolic office, which we as Catholics say is eventually inherited in the office of the Pope. So, Peter, James, and John accompany Jesus up to this high mountain. It's just the four of them on this mountain. This mountain, by the way, is said to be called Mount Tabor, is where it's said to be, which is in modern-day Israel. So the text says, Matthew and Mark use that word transfigured, or in the Greek, metamorphosized, that there is a change of appearance. That's what both of those words mean. Transfiguratio or metamorphosis both mean a change of appearance. So Matthew and Mark use that kind of really highlight something interesting. Luke refers to it in a different way. And he talks about it that this just what happens. He talks about it in the midst of prayer as well. A very interesting little note there. But what happens, they say? Mark and Luke both talk about his clothes become dazzling white. Matthew does as well, but Matthew and Luke talk about his face. Matthew says the face of Jesus shines like the sun, while Luke says his face changed in appearance. What seems to be happening is that there is some sort, Jesus looks different up here on this mountain in this event. He looks different compared to how he is normally viewed and seen by Peter, James, and John, and even the rest of the people who encounter him. So this transfiguration, this metamorphosis happens. But then two people appear, Moses and Elijah. Matthew and Mark just say they're conversing, while Luke goes into a little bit more detail, says, Moses and Elijah, he says, appear in glory. So almost in a similar way to Jesus, and spoke of his exodus that he was going to accomplish in Jerusalem. So they are, as it were, kind of conversing with him about something specific, whereas Matthew and Mark just say, they're just talking. Luke offers this interesting note about Peter, James, and John seeming to be overcome by sleep. And if we go back with talking about going up the mountain to pray, this may have, in Luke's context, and Luke recalling this, this could have been something similar to what we hear in Jesus praying in the garden the night before he dies. That Jesus is spending a long time in prayer, and those around him are just so tired, so weak or wearied that they seem to pass out. But Luke says they are fully awakened, and they behold all of this. They see all of this. Matthew and Mark don't mention any of this. Peter is the one who responds. Again, the one who is primary, who has the primacy, was leader, as it were. Peter replies first, and he says, in all of them, it is good to be here. And in some way, he gives a reverential title. In Matthew, he says Lord, Jewish title. Mark uses Rabbi, again, another very Jewish title, but not as much as Lord. And Luke, he says, he calls him Master, or Teacher. It is good that we are here. Peter seems to be overwhelmed. And then he talks about making tents. Now, this sounds kind of weird. Are we just going camping or something? No. He talks about making tents. In the Exodus journey that the Israelites went through, when they left Egypt, went through the Red Sea, and went through the wilderness, God commanded them to have a tent built for his presence, for the presence of the Ark of the Covenant and kind of as it were the temporary temple for the Israelites as they were going through the desert. That in Latin is tabernaculum, which is where we get the word tabernacle in its context in Catholic and Christian circles. So Peter is kind of using this similar idea here of the divine tabernacle, the divine tent. On the other side, it's like, well, why don't we do that here? Jesus, we have one for you. Moses, we have one for you. And Elijah, we have one for you. Almost as it were saying, giving them kind of a divine acclaim. Giving all three of these kind of illuminated, radiant beings that are before him, to give all of them their own sort of acclaim. Mark and Luke both put this in kind of a personal context. That Peter seems to not know what he's saying. Mark, at least, gives in the context he was terrified. This vision is so immense, is so intense that it is extremely difficult for them to fully comprehend, or they're misunderstanding what is happening here. So in the midst of this, as Peter is talking about tents and establishing tents, kind of establishing this, what happens is the cloud comes over. So the entire mountaintop, as it were, is wrapped in this cloud, either in the shadow of the cloud or the cloud itself. There comes then a voice. A voice speaks from the cloud, and it sounds very similar to an event we've already encountered. The voice says, "This is my beloved son," or in Luke, "my chosen son. Listen to him." Matthew stretches a little more. For Matthew has, "With whom I am well pleased." So my beloved or my well-pleased son, listen to him. Matthew adds a very sort of Jewish understanding after that phrase. It talks about when the disciples heard this phrase, when they heard the voice, they felt prostrate and were very much afraid. Why? This is very much a Mosaic moment, not in the sense of something like what Moses encountered. If you recall, we may have talked about it briefly, but Moses, in being called by God for his mission of leading the Israelites out of Egypt, Moses is called up to the mountain, and he is enshrouded in this cloud. This happens. This actually happens to Moses as they are leaving and as they are preparing to kind of go to the promised land. So on Mount Sinai, Moses is wrapped in a cloud, and he converses with God. So Peter, James, and John, being good Jewish boys who know their scriptures, know that when a cloud comes and a voice speaks from it, it is the presence of God among them. So they naturally, having understood that, fall prostrate, lay themselves before the presence of God, and they are very much frightened. What is going to happen from here? What is God doing here? What is going to be done? In Matthew, Jesus kind of calms them. He says, "Rise and do not be afraid." So at some point, they all do realize. They look up. And everything's gone. Moses is gone. Elijah's gone. The cloud is gone. Even Jesus's metamorphosis, his transfiguration, is done. So everything and all it is Jesus as they've known him, Jesus as they've seen him. That's what remains. Luke ends his account by saying that they fell silent. They did not at that time tell anyone what they had happened. In Matthew and Mark's account, Jesus tells them not to talk about it, and he gives specific demands until the Son of Man has been raised from the dead. Mark says, "had risen from the dead." So,
the conditions here are not to talk about it immediately, not to tell any of the other 9 apostles, because there were 12 apostles. Remember, this is 3 of them. So not to tell the other 9 what had happened until the Son of Man, personal identifier. We talked about that a little bit. Personal identifier of Jesus, the Son of Man, had risen from the dead. So, what is the significance and the importance of all of this? First of all, when it happens is important. It's important to understand when it is that all of this happens. And it is said to have happened about 40 days before the crucifixion. The traditional sort of commentary or accounts say that this event happened about 40 days before Jesus' crucifixion. It's important to understand that because from this point onward, and then we understand also this is after Jesus begins to prophesy about all that will happen in his last days. And many of his disciples, especially the apostles, are incredulous. They're like, "Oh no, that's Jesus. That ain't going to happen to you. That's no big deal." So he takes them up. He takes them up this mountain 40 days before the crucifixion, which is why it is in the Catholic preparation for the celebration of Easter, the celebration of the resurrection, the season that is known as Lent, in which we are currently entered. That one of the Sundays, so one of the times when Catholics gather for Mass, we hear this gospel. We hear one of these 3 gospels about the Transfiguration. That has happened from antiquity, from at least the 6th century. That gospel has been heard at some point in Lent. So it is natural to do that because it is a preparation for what is to come. It marks what is happening. Why? What else is significant about it? It is significant because it is a self-revelation of Jesus. What do I mean by that? Many of the commentators and theologians, reading, reflecting, writing about this, they say that what happens in the Transfiguration is, in a certain sense, a lack of a miracle. What do I mean by that? The understanding, what we already understood from the beginning of Jesus' life, from his birth, who he is and what he is, that he is, of course, God-man, the incarnate Son of God, without losing divinity, taking on our humanity, becoming a human being, a man like us in all things, except sin. They argue, and rightly so, the divine glory, the divine dignity should be radiating from every pore of his being, of his physical human being. And yet, Jesus appears to be a normal human being like you and I. No different, no, on at least outward appearance, no more special or significant than anyone else. So they will say that, they will comment on it and say that this event of the Transfiguration is a lack of a miracle, or the absence, I should say, not lack. That is, as it were, the Jesus fully revealing himself as he really is. So letting that divine glory shine through him, to shine out and to radiate within him and with him. So is a way of then understanding who it is that is preparing to undergo all of this. And everything that we see here affirms this self-revelation. First of all, the two figures who appeared before Jesus, Moses and Elijah. Moses is obviously a stand-in for the law, in this sense, at least the Jewish law. Why? Because Moses is the great lawgiver. He is the one who receives the Ten Commandments from God and passes them on to the Israelites to be obeyed, to be observed. So Moses is the great lawgiver. Elijah is the other great half of the Old Testament, and that is that he is the greatest or most significant of the prophets, of those who call Israel back to their right observance of the law, of their relationship with God, along with foretelling and prophesying the coming of the one who will make this completely possible, the Messiah, the Christ. So, the law and the prophets both bear witness to who Jesus is, that Jesus is the Christ, the Messiah, the anointed one. Both of them, drawing that forward. The commentators see in this also the witness of the old and the new. Moses and Elijah, that which had come, that which had passed. And Peter, James, and John, that which is coming, that which will happen in the future. And of course, we have as well, we have the voice. Recall what we heard in the baptism of Jesus. In his baptism, we see the heavens opened, the dove comes down, and the voice says, "This is my beloved son." Here we have kind of an opposite encounter. The cloud is always seen as kind of obscuring the divine presence in the Old Testament. Why? Because it's too great for human beings to behold or apprehend. It said that it would kill a human being because they just can't take it in. It's too much, too rich, too splendid for the human person. So the cloud represents the Father offering up this revelation as well. That it's not just Jesus' own personhood. It's not even just the testimony of the ancients, of Moses and Elijah, both of them kind of going, "This is him. This is the guy we've been waiting for." It is also God himself, at least God the Father pointing to him, saying, "This is my son." And of course, this is not something that is necessarily a personal message. The baptism of the Lord was a very personal message. God speaking to Jesus, saying, "You are, this is my son." This is very much for Peter, James, and John, who will be the ones who accompany Jesus the most, especially in his last days. That God says, "This is my son." You there, you three, even though you've been following him and don't seem to understand, this is my son. This is my beloved son. Listen to him. The command of God. Listen to him. Do whatever he says. Listen. And then do it. So, in doing this, in receiving this, Peter, James, and John are the greatest witnesses of who Jesus is. Why? Because they will be the ones, as I just said, who will be accompanying the Christ the most in his last days. We will see Peter, James, and John with him almost until the last hours. And even though they have been following and been paying attention, supposedly, to everything that's going on, yet they will, two of them at least, will falter and will fail in their discipleship and their following and adherence to Jesus. One will remain true even through the crucifixion and death. So this event is meant to be a sign of preparation for what is to come. Why? Not only to show who it is who will endure it, but also as a sign of consolation in the upcoming days. What do I mean by that? To show that what Jesus does will not be for nothing. That what he has been declaring, teaching, preaching, doing, all of these things will not be lost in what is to come. On the contrary, that they must lead to the cruel events of Holy Week, as we're about to see. So, in all of this, it is meant to be a consolation for those who are seeing it, and a consolation for what's to come. Why? Because the glory that is revealed in Jesus in here is meant to be shared ultimately, as we understand later on and read about. This consolation, this glory that is seen in Jesus is meant to be shared by humanity. Why? Recall again the baptism. We talked about in baptism that when the Christian is baptized, God says the same thing as he said to Jesus. This is my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased. Why? In baptism, we are reconfigured, reconsecrated to God in Christ, so that we are then able to call God Father, to pray the Our Father, as we should, as we looked at in some of his teachings. That does not end, or that is not meant to end after baptism. Oh, that's it. No. This goes to reaffirm the need to follow Jesus. What does that voice say? Not just, this is my son, this is my beloved son. Listen to him. Do whatever he tells you. Listen to him. Well, what has Jesus been talking about the most in everything coming before this? Simply one thing: bearing the cross. It's important to understand this perspective. Bearing the cross. Jesus does not make the path necessarily easy for his believers. He does not. What he tells them time and again is to bear the cross, to bear with the sufferings of this world, the sufferings of others. In fact, shortly before in some of the accounts, he says, if you want to be my disciple, you must take up your cross. I believe St. Luke writes, he says, take up your cross daily and follow me. This sign of the Transfiguration is meant to be a consolation for those of us who are still bearing the cross. For those of us who are still trying, whether we're doing well or not, trying to follow Jesus. Why? Because this life is hard. You're probably, if you're still watching this during the week this is released, it's been a hard week probably for you with midterms and getting assignments done in time so that your professors can grade them and all that. It's been very difficult, hasn't it? Life is difficult.
It's at the time of recording this. We're nearly a year removed from when we did the lockdowns and everything that has happened with the panic around the coronavirus. Life is hard. And Jesus never promises it will be easy. This is sometimes the point at which Catholics and Protestants and certain Protestants can disagree. That some will say, well, there's nothing more to worry about. But no, on the contrary, we at least in the Catholic understanding, we understand that this life is a burden at times. It is not meant to be comfortable. Jesus never promises that. He promises instead, honestly, more often than not, that it will be hard. Carrying a cross is hard. Why? Because a cross is meant to be able to bear an entire human person, an entire human being, an adult, not just like a child or a teenager, a full-grown adult. That's heavy. That's burdensome. It's hard to do. But Jesus does promise that it will be worth something, that it will be worthwhile to do it, to bear that cross. In revealing his glory, that glory that we will not see again until after the resurrection. In doing all of that, Jesus then gives us a sign of consolation and a kind of preview, as it were, of what the future holds for us. A share in this same glory. The same glory that radiates from Jesus in the Transfiguration. This divine illumination that occurs, that happens. This being called once more, being affirmed as the beloved Son of the Father. All of that can only happen if we work in union, in conjunction with Jesus. If we do our part to bear the cross, whether it is something done within ourselves, whether it's something imposed upon us by others, whatever it may be. All of it is meant to lead up to direct us towards that everlasting glory. Not to glory in this life. Just think about that. Jesus should have looked like this his entire life, but he hides it. He humbles himself, as it were, so as not to share it. Because that is not the state in which one is meant to receive that, not in the current life. It's only in the next. So it is then Jesus is spurring us on, giving us a preview or a taste and an encouragement. This is what awaits you. This is what I desire. Receive this. Be transformed by this. Become like me. If we are going to be like him, we have to do like him. It's not just, well, Jesus did it all and I don't have to do anything more. No, we have to do it in him, through him, and with him. What all that entails, we will see as we dive deeper into the actions, the work of Holy Week. For now, though, read up on that, understand all of that. If you have questions on any of that, feel free to message me as normal. Be sure that you do the participation assignment, which will be due Tuesday. Be sure that if you have any missing assignments or need any help with anything, be sure to get those in. The midterm grades are going to be published Monday, March 8th. So if you have concerns or issues with your grade, feel free to contact me. If nothing else, then I hope you have a good rest of your day. I hope the weekend's well, and even though you don't get a spring break, hopefully you can get some rest at least sometime soon. If nothing else, enjoy. God bless. We'll see you around.